Yeah.
10 o'clock.
Okay. It's 10 o'clock.
All right, you ready?
Yes.
Let me call this first meeting of 2025 for the Prince William County Electoral Board to order. If you would all please rise for a moment of silence and then remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Now join the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for being here. You may have noticed there's a new face in the room. This is not London. So London's term ended at the end of December, and Heidi Stirrup has been nominated and appointed by the Circuit Court to be the other Republican member on the board. So welcome, and look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Just to say how excited I am to participate in this august board. We have very important duties to follow, and I'm honored to be here. So I will do my level best to make sure that the good work that has gone before continues and improves. Thank you.
All right. So the first order of business is organization of the electoral board. So under the code, the chair and the secretary are of the opposing parties. So do we have a motion for organizing the board?
I move that we organize the board for 2025.
And second.
And do you have
I would move that Keith be the chairman, that Marcus be the secretary, and that I would be the vice chairman.
okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. So we go. All right. So the next order of business is approval of minutes. And we have several. Do we have the unsigned?
They're right next to you there.
Oh, these, okay.
The two sets. There's all the signed copies are in that, stuff to sign is in that stack. So you have the September 30th meeting and the November 6th meeting. We had you all approved the October meeting minutes in November, but there was some mix up with the September file. So we had to go back and recreate that.
Okay. So where will those show up in the minutes or the recordings for
The minutes from this meeting will reflect which minutes were approved by this board. And these ones are a little unusual because the only board member of record for the September 30th meeting, Keith, is you. So I don't know how that works in terms of motions, but you're the only signature on that one. And then the November 6th meeting, Marcus and Keith are the two members that are of record from that meeting. So the signature lines reflect that. Okay. So I don't know if the board still passes a motion when you're the only signature on, or how that works exactly.
I will move that we pass the minutes, approve the minutes for October and November, recognizing that Keith will be the only signature in October.
It's for September.
Or September, sorry.
All right, I'll second that. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, I would just note that I am not voting because I wasn't here, and so I can't attest to the accuracy of the minutes.
All right. And then, so we've already approved the October minutes. So where will where will those show up, I guess, is a question. So these will be part of the minutes for today's meeting. So will the October minutes be included in these also, even though we've already approved them?
No, they're already on the website.
Oh, okay.
So once you all approve and sign the minutes, we post those on the website. I believe, I think the law is that we have to post those within 5 days of your all's approval. That was a new law within the last year or two. So we post those, we try to within a day or two get them up on the website. And of course, we also post on the website the video recording, the agenda, all the supplemental materials that you all are using during the meeting that are, available for the public, like election officer appointments or policies that the board adopts. We post all that information online as well. So that's all available on the meetings and minutes page of the pwcvotes.org.
Okay. All right. Next item is the report from electoral board members. Anything else you want to?
Just, good morning and happy to be here.
Mr. Secretary, any?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank Judge London Steverson for his many years of faithful service on the board, and we certainly wish him and his wife the best in this next chapter of their lives, and it's a privilege to welcome Miss Heidi Stirrup. She comes with a wealth of experience and capability. I know she'll be value added, a tremendous asset to the team, so welcome, Miss Heidi. I think, well, as everybody knows, we just came through a very interesting and dynamic election season in 2024. I think everybody would agree that we're blessed to live in interesting times. And in November this last year, the people of the American people and the people of Prince William County had another opportunity to choose their elected representatives and thereby determine the direction and the future of the country. And we have a very unique thing going on in America right now. We have the privilege of choosing who our government representatives will be and how we are to be governed. That's not a common thing in history and in our world. So I think it's worth recognizing that and being grateful for it and participating in it. I think it's one of the most basic and fundamental duties and rights of a citizen to vote. And yet, after all, it is the people's government. As Abraham Lincoln said, it's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But in truth, the government really belongs to the people who show up. And in the last election, November of 2024, only 68% of the eligible voters in Prince William County chose to avail themselves of that opportunity. It is the goal of this board and of the election office that every eligible voter in Prince William County would vote, and only vote once, and also that they would go beyond just that basic minimum requirement of participation as a citizen, but look for ways to meaningfully contribute and participate and even help administer the election as an election officer. We have a number, I won't steal the registrar's thunder, but we have a number of exciting initiatives going into 2025 that we think will promote those objectives. Improving voter education, increasing voter turnout, increasing the number of individuals who are willing to step forward and serve as election officers. And of course, all of that is in service of our primary mission, which is to ensure the continuation of safe, fair, secure, and transparent elections. I would like to commend the registrar and his staff for the good work that they did in November's election in 2024, and I look forward to working with them and the members of this board in 2025. Thank you.
All right, great. So let me agree with Marcus that we are indeed in a unique environment. I think his definition of unique and my definition of unique may be a little bit different. But I just wanted to also thank the office for everything we've done in the last several years to improve the processes. I do want to note that the very first meeting of the State Board of Elections this year, the State Board voted unanimously to begin the process to remove two members, I think one member of the Waynesboro Electoral Board. So for those of you who were not aware, last fall, 2 Republican members of the Waynesboro Electoral Board announced early on, September, October, that they were going to refuse to certify the results for the November election. Basically because they said unless we can do a hand count of every ballot in every precinct, we can't certify the results. Well, in all the years that I've been on the board, I never thought that the Electoral Board had any independent authority to challenge the law, to disobey, to do anything other than certify the numbers that are reported on election night. And so the voters of Waynesboro were forced to go to court to get a court order ordering those 2 members to do their job and to certify the numbers. I'm also pleased that there's a bill introduced in the General Assembly this year that specifically spells out that the job of the Electoral Board is ministerial. We don't have authority to investigate things that we think have gone wrong. We don't have authority to ignore the law or change the process. It's our job to make sure that the elections are conducted fairly and transparently, and also to certify the numbers that are reported and approved. And that's where our responsibility ends. And so I think it's important for all of us to recognize the roles and responsibilities and to stay in our lane, I guess. I obviously have a different perspective on what's going on in Washington right now, but as an Electoral Board member, that's not my job. But when it comes to our responsibility to certify elections, then I think it's important that we stay in our lane. And so I'm happy that the Electoral Board the State Board has moved, and I'm hopeful that there'll be legislation specifically spelling out that we have, what our responsibility is to certify the numbers. So with that, we will, the next item of business is the General Registrar's Report.
All right. So I'm going to review some things today from this past year, from recent years, kind of an overview of where we are, where we've been, the things that we've been doing, the volume of the work we've done, the programmatic changes we've made, some explanations of how elections have gone, and sort of just a state of things to kind of kick off our year here, which is appropriate as we have a board with 2/3 new members here, and I'm sure we'll be, I was just saying to Marcus right before the meeting, we've kind of come to a capstone here after a presidential election and a number of initiatives that we've worked on over the past couple years, so I'm looking forward to working with this board on what the next level of those changes and improvements are, and figuring out what path we're going to push forward on in terms of making sure we're running efficient, fair, accurate elections in Prince William County. In terms of the volume of work we've done over 2024, so this is a lot of work. We assisted more than 320,000 voters in 3 elections. We mailed more than 70,000 ballots. We assisted more than 100,000 early voters. We had active voting for nearly 40% of the year. To kind of put that in perspective too, if you are a Maryland election official, you might have active voting for less than 10% every other year. So Virginia election officials have a lot more pressure and a lot more work to do than in most states. We had more than 140,000 voter registration updates, mailings, and transactions. All that was accomplished by a board of 3 people and a staff of about 17. So it's a tremendous amount of work to get done. We didn't have any significant issues in Prince William County to report, despite a really high pressure, intense partisan environment. We did really excellent work. When I started here, that was my hope, that when we got through 2024, we would look back and say, there really weren't any issues or problems. That's always the goal. It's a lot of different things. There's more than, we've talked about, there's more than 300 tasks that go into each election. And to do that 3 times and have hardly any issues is really a tribute to the leadership of the board and the excellent work of our staff to make sure that we're running really good elections here in Prince William County. A couple minor issues to report. It's not all, roses. We did have an issue with the tally point in the party field requirement. So to clarify that a little bit, provisional ballots on election day have a log, and we use tally point, which is an electronic log, so that our staff can get the information quickly after the election. There's a log that's required to be done. In that log, there's a number of fields, and before the election, we didn't realize that the party field was a required field. We realized this at about, 6:05 a.m. on election day, after we had a call from a precinct saying we're not sure what to do here for this. It wasn't something, we talked to the vendor, it wasn't something we could just change on the fly. That would have other ramifications. It's irrelevant to a general election. The party field is really only there if it's a primary, so we know if there was a Democratic provisional ballot or a Republican provisional ballot for the board. So it was a non-issue for a general. So what we told the officers to put was the Republican was the first in the pull-down menu. We told them just select that for every voter. That way there's no, information that the board really knows. And it's a field that we just deleted anyway. Once we had the data and we passed information on to you guys to make your provisional judgments, we didn't use that field regardless because it was meaningless. So that was a little bit of a mistake. It wasn't a huge significant one, but certainly going forward, we'll make sure to turn that field off as a requirement when it is a general election. Had some early voting concerns. Where there was a change in the early voting process and the pattern, the number of sites we had, how long they were open for, where they were open. In my experience, anytime you have changes to early voting sites, you're going to get some concerns and some complaints. So I think that's something that we will, look at further, see if there's, I don't know if got a contact from a couple of the county supervisors who are the ones that ultimately decide that ordinance. It used to be that the Electoral board decided that, and you all do decide the hours at each location, but the Board of County Supervisors determines the locations and the start times for the different locations. So I think overall it worked well. We're going to talk more about that when I get into some detail here. But those were really the only couple things that were of note. There's always some different complaints about how a voter was treated by an officer, or a question, maybe an officer made a mistake, some of those kind of things that happen in every election, but nothing really that was a trend or that really popped out. So I want to talk a little bit more about sort of where we've been as well leading up to 2044 here, because my opinion is that elections simply work. That the election process that America has, and that Virginia has, and that Prince William County has, is a process that works. We've had a lot of challenges and a lot of issues brought to our attention. Non-citizen voting, voting machine concerns, voter fraud. We've done a lot of review of those issues by our staff. The board has asked us to look at those issues over the past several years, and we've examined those, and we've answered those issues, and we've explained how Virginia's process works for those issues. They've been litigated, they've been audited, they've been researched. We've sadly had personal attacks on our staff, on our board, etc. And our staff, unfortunately, when we did our organizational survey last year, personal safety continues to be the lowest scoring category for our staff. They're concerned about the way people act. We've certainly had a lot of election officers who have, because of some of this distrust, have had voters that have been very angry and disrespectful towards them at the polling places. Thankfully, this election, I think overall, it actually went pretty well. It was something we were concerned about. We added extra police at all of our early voting sites for that. But we want to make sure that our election officers who are, I know we pay them, but they're really volunteers. We don't pay them a lot to go out and work a really long day. And they do great work. So we want to make sure they're safe out there. So we've kind of gone through this environment over the last, 4 years here. And I think one big takeaway is that candidates and issues determine winners. That the election system does not determine winners. That the processes we have for election day, for early voting, for mail voting, human systems are not perfect. They're never perfect. Any human system is going to have things that have to be accounted for. But I think we do account for them, and we're continuing to work constantly to make sure to improve those. And we're going to see shortly in this report a number of things that we've done on those fronts, because I think that we are one of the most transparent and accountable agencies in the state. and doing things that other agencies, even outside of our state, are looking at. So I wanted to note that dedicated public servants deserve respect, that elections are run very well in Virginia, and the results show the story that the candidates and the issues are the ones that determine winners. So looking back at the 2020 election and 2024 election, a lot of questions about that. You know, there was a lot of integrity investigations after 2020 and concerns about that. Certainly after 2024, we saw a lot less of that, but I certainly saw a headline, you know, did Elon Musk and Starlink influence the 2024 election results? So we see it from both sides. I think there's a pretty simple story here, and that is that the incumbent approval rating going into these elections was pretty low. It was 34% for Trump in 2020, and the Democrats won. And it was 40% for Biden in going into 2024, and the Republicans won. And they won by small margins because we have a country that's very evenly divided in terms of things. So there's a small number of states that determine these elections. It's a very small swing. And to be honest, I think our election officials around the country are doing a really outstanding job. And you see the change too. The change is pretty consistent, 1.5% to 2.5% change, you know, from 2020 to 2024. A few states that were more than that. And you see there's a little outliers, but there's very consistent data on this. So the summary of this is unpopular incumbents were narrowly defeated due to higher turnout by their base of the challenger and slight shifts in voter preference. Marcus, do you remember who I told you was going to win the presidential election at 9 p.m. on election night? Who did I tell you was going to win?
Trump.
I told him Trump was going to win. I had not seen any national news. John and I were sitting there putting election results in like crazy to make sure we get our results up as fast as we can. But you can see little shifts in the data. You see precincts that are Republican precincts were up a little bit, and precincts that are Democratic precincts were down a little bit. Little shifts in how people vote. And when you've done this as long as I have, you start to see these trends and you start to see these differences, and it becomes really clear. And sure enough, that's, you know, exactly what happened. The poll numbers support this as well. If you look at the polls from 2020, Biden was up by about 8% going into that election. Harris was up about 1.2%. And what the experts in this area, this is not my area of expertise, but what I certainly heard is Trump tends to be underaccounted for in those polls. And you see that, about 3% on average, it went his way from the polls compared to how the election results came out nationally. And you see that that was what the difference was in terms of what the election results, because polls provide information for politicians, they provide information for the media, but they are not the final election results. We don't know who's going to vote. We don't know who's going to, you know, come out and vote. To another board member conversation, I remember Keith, about a week before the election, he said to me, you know, people are concerned about illegal people voting and other things like that. We're working our hardest just to get our registered voters out to vote, which is exactly what Marcus talked about before, that, you know, you only see 2/3 of the voters, even in a presidential election in Prince William County, going out and casting their ballot. So that's really what we're working on. When you're seeing these differences, you're looking at parties and candidates that are just trying to move the needle a little bit and get a little bit. So this is a remarkably consistent differences. And you see this in the news report in this too. They talked about Virginia voter turnout was down across the board this election, and it was especially down in blue localities. You saw during early voting and in overall turnout, some counties out in the western part of the state, heavily Republican counties, that were voting at higher rates than what you saw in heavily blue counties like Arlington and Alexandria. So the results show consistent and predictable behavior with polling data turnout and the variations that are there. And extensive reviews have confirmed that election results are accurate. We've seen litigation, we've seen academic studies, we've seen all kinds of things done. And you see when we're talking about this 2% difference, you know, from the presidential election back here, you know, 1.5 to 2.5% shift towards the Republicans in a lot of these states. Very similar thing here in Prince William County in our district. Exactly 2% shift towards Republicans. Now the Democrats still won the 7th and 10th district races, but they won it by a smaller margin. So when you look at all these really identical differences in margin of victory, it becomes clear that there's a lot of patterns here, you know, that again, candidates and issues are what determine winners in elections. And our job at the Office of Elections is to follow the Virginia Code and elect regulations to execute fair and accurate elections. I think we go above and beyond to provide transparency in voter education. A lot of the things and criticisms and concerns that we've had I don't think are very legitimate, to be honest, but I don't have a problem with us explaining things and being extremely transparent and answering to those things. And I think we've done that. So I think our staff and our election officials, have handled more than maybe what was fair to them, but they've done it really well, and we've done it in a way that's tried to make it as clear and transparent as possible to people. To note a couple areas of these concerns related to this election, and again, going back to these concerns too, we've said this before, and Keith kind of reflected it too, if you have concerns about what the laws are and how the Democrats and the Republicans shift election laws just slightly, those are directed to the state and to the governor, and not things that our office gets to decide, not things that the board gets to decide. We have to make sure we're executing these things properly. I know we've had, some areas of concern, so I just wanted to relay from the 2024 general election what we saw on these. Voter ID, I know there's concerns about the loophole related to voter confirmation, ID confirmation forms. 99.89% of PWC voters showed identification. So we only had 251 that used that ID confirmation form. I know a couple of them were Republicans at early voting too, just to make a political point. We had 4 complaints from voters that had to vote provisionally due to officer mistakes. So let's say, for example, there's I'm going to use a fictitious name there's a Stephanie Smith, and there's a Stephen Smithson, and they live at similar addresses or numbers. So we had a few instances where officers made a mistake and voters had to vote provisionally because we discovered what the officer's mistake were. The poll book data that we have is great because we can go back and look at the data and see what happened and when that mistake was made. So those provisional voters were not precluded. They did not have their franchise blocked because of that mistake, but officers do make mistakes, but they're very small. We didn't have any complaints about mail ballot fraud. We didn't have anybody call in and say, I went to vote and they said that somebody had already mailed in a ballot for me. We didn't have any of that. So we did refer a few matters to the Attorney General that were related to people that were, one was a recruitment issue, working with seniors, and I know it's an issue the board wants to talk about in a future meeting, and a couple of them were possible double voting situations, and we referred them to the Attorney General. So we do that because there are situations where people do bad behavior, or maybe they make a mistake, or maybe they're senile. So we do respond to those. And citizens should expect the reasonable redress of concerns by our office, but not unreasonable ones. We have to address facts that are in front of us. We have to abide by the state laws. We have to abide by the decisions the board makes. So I just wanted to note that. I think, going forward, that I think we've done an excellent job of providing transparency and accountability in our process. And people can disagree. We have a public comment section for that. It's fine. But I will note that one essential component of democracy is accepting the results of elections that produce results. Accepting the results of election that produce results that you do not like. That's a part of democracy. I'm sure there were a lot of people that were upset about after this election. I'm sure there were a lot of people that were upset after 2020. Don't have to single yourself out, Keith. But I think that is a component of democracy, and what election officials have had to endure in the meantime is really not proportionate to the job that they did and to the performance that they had. If I make mistakes as an election official, as a public official who's accountable to the public and to the board, I expect punishment for that. I expect responsibility to be taken. I expect accountability. I can't take accountability for things that didn't happen. So that's my last comment on that. I want to talk about what our program has done in the meantime, though, and over 2024, what we achieved. So administratively, our admin team, we implemented new I voted stickers. These were very popular with voters. The kids loved They're Cardinal Future Voter stickers. The voters had really nice things to say about our Marine Corps Museum I Voted sticker, so I'm excited. We will see the Marine Corps Museum sticker again in the primary, and then in November we will switch over each November to the Hands In, and then our county montage at the bottom right there, and then the cannon. I think they're a really nice sticker set. They celebrate a lot of different components and sources of pride for Prince William County. And if we can do anything to draw attention to, we only get 2/3 in the presidential elections. We certainly get a lot less in the state and local elections. So anything we can do to try to encourage voters to come out for those elections is a win in my book. So very popular. We also hosted an open house. We had voters come through and see our process and get a chance to kind of see everything that we do. That was very well received. We're planning on doing that again this year. We got really good media coverage of that. NBC did like a 2.5-minute piece on it. A bunch of newspapers covered that. I think that not only is the event itself good, but the media coverage gives people some exposure to all the hard work and all the steps that go into all of the stuff. We produce 2 document series. We have them right in our lobby when people come in, and they're available online. They're on election security, and one is called How It Works, just to kind of explain to voters, hey, when results are getting reported, here's how that process works. There's a lot of misunderstanding about certain things. So we hope that that helps. Those are resources for people to take advantage of to see kind of how all that works. And as an organization internally, we do an organization survey. The whole county does every year or two. And we have improved by 21 points over 3 years. And we were one of the worst rated agencies in the entire county in 2021. And we are now well above the county average and among the best agencies in the county in 2024. So that's according to our own employees and what they see and what their feelings and experiences. On the registration side, we've improved the provisional ballot efficiency and handling. The board reviewed more than 7,000 provisional ballots. They had some late nights on that week after the election. It's always interesting after the election, everyone's usually kind of done. The public is kind of done a day or two later because the results are all out, but there's a lot of work that goes in after that. So London and Marcus and Keith were there from, 9 a.m. till 11 for a couple straight days, very thoroughly reviewing those provisional ballots and making decisions about whether those votes counted or not. We also fully updated a backlog of voter registration records. We have a lot of old files that there was a mandate from the state back in 2020 or 2021, is that correct?
Like 19. Yeah.
2019, to update those. That was when I arrived, that had not been done. So we got a initiative to get a contract with the company to scan all those and add it to the system. But the state sent me a letter after we'd gotten the funding saying we can't use a contractor for it, even though that had been done a couple years prior. So there was a little delay in that, but this year we caught up with all of those records. So it's more than 1,050,000 documents. These are old registration records from years ago. We at one point had this giant revolving
Retriever.
What is it? Retriever, yeah. This giant machine that used to be in our office that if you go to any election office and they still have them, it just like rotates around and you file stuff in it. That's how we used to keep the documents prior to databases becoming a more common thing. So all of that information that was in that in boxes and in that device, they've all been scanned now and they've all been added into the various systems. So we're fully caught up and up to date on that. So that is good news. Whoops, wrong direction. Okay, operations, we added additional verification to our equipment delivery this year. So we had election officers that were following around the equipment delivery team so they could verify that when they stopped off at precinct 304 that they did in fact drop off the equipment for precinct 304 and not for 305 or for someone else. Very important that those are accurate. We've had our facilities open 100% on time the last 2 elections. So at 5 a.m. when the officers arrive, one of the challenges is always, if a janitor sleeps in that's supposed to let us in the building or, someone at a church, we've gotten in on time the last 2 elections. That helps us make sure that we're open at 6 a.m. We are meeting all of the security and equipment standards. The board reviews policies and our compliance with that each year. There's more than 150 state standards we have to meet. We're meeting all the required standards. For LNA testing over 2024, we tested over 15,000 ballots during LNA testing through our high-speed scanner, through our election day scanners, to make sure those scanners are working accurately, that they don't have mistakes or issues, that the ballots have been printed and formatted correctly. And we also completed an RLA, a risk limiting audit, after the election. That the state did two different audits this year and found the results to be accurate within the parameters of that audit. We also now have the election information on school marquees. So a few days before the election happens, the schools are now putting, that there's an upcoming election on the marquees, which is great because then people, as they're driving through their communities, will be able to see that and know that their polling place is going to be open on that upcoming Tuesday. In terms of early voting, we expanded our early voting locations and weekend voting. I think we modified to more sensible timelines of our satellites, not having the satellites open for all 45 days, but during the times when voters most need them. We had almost no wait times during early voting. That's a huge achievement. We had almost 100,000 early voters, and we only had, maybe the first day for the first few hours, and then the last few days for peak periods of the day where we expect some lines, but that was a really great achievement. Our officers did so well out at those sites. I mean, the staff at the DMV and the Haymarket, great work. That DMV is like a closet, and the number of voters they put through there was amazing, and the number of people that were voting curbside there, the team's constantly out running the cars assisting voters. So I think not only did we have early voting with very little wait time, but we probably could have had 50,000 more voters without a more significant wait over the course of those several weeks. We also added a wait time module so voters could go online and see if there was a wait at their site. They could go online and say, oh, okay, it's 15 minutes over at Ferlazzo right now, or half an hour at Ferlazzo. I'm going to go to Dumfries instead because I'm kind of in between both of them. So that's a nice addition to our website. For officers, we have more than 3,000 active election officers. We recruited nearly 1,000 officers, almost 900 officers in 2024. We did more training on provisional ballots. That was definitely a focus, and I think it paid off, especially because there were so many provisional ballots to do. Getting officers to do provisional ballots accurately, I can tell you from working in several jurisdictions, is probably the hardest thing on the officer front, and I think they've made improvements on that. Our officers gave the leadership class, the chiefs and assistant chiefs, 87% of them rated it as an excellent, which is significantly up from a couple years ago. So that was really great. And we had parity in all of our precinct leadership. So if we had a Republican chief, we had a Democratic assistant chief. If we had a Democratic chief, we had a Republican assistant chief, and also met all the other requirements of 24-115, which is, having equal numbers, not equal numbers, but close to equal numbers of Republican and Democratic officers in each precinct. The law does allow for a difference of one. You can have 4 Republicans and 3 Democrats, or vice versa. Usually that's a geographic thing. The western part of the county, we're challenged to get enough Democratic officers. In the eastern part of the county, we have a challenge of getting Republican officers. So thank you to not only all the officers who worked in general, but those who made the drive from other parts of the county that are not their own community to help us reach that parity. That's really great. I know that Dina and Rick make a lot of promises to those officers to get them to make sure we're meeting that standard. And so they did great work in working with those officers and making sure we're meeting that. Mail voting, we were ahead of all the statutory deadlines for all 3 elections. So our voters we have to mail out ballots by 45 days before the election. Our voters were getting their ballots before that point, generally. Those that are on the permanent absentee list or who applied early enough. Our cure rate is up to 62.6%. That used to be just over 50% 2 years ago. The new form that we have that has helped assist voters and a sort of more routinized communication schedule with those voters has helped get that cure rate up. And I will say too, that number is a little deceiving. Most of the voters who send in their ballot more than a week before the election and have some kind of issue, maybe they forgot to put their last four of their social security on it, or maybe they forgot to sign it. Most of those officers, the vast majority of them get their ballot cured. It's really high among those individuals that wait until the last week. So the lesson we've seen from that is, if you're a mail voter, send in your ballot, earlier, because if there is an issue with it, you have more of an opportunity to cure it, and we've seen that play out in the cure numbers. We have improved the efficiency of the intake process for mail voting. This is always a challenge with a lot of temporary employees and a lot of mail, and the mail really varies. Some days we get 4,000 ballots back, and some days we get 38 ballots back. So we've improved the efficiency of that. We also now have more than 7,000 voters signed up for ballot tracks. Ballot tracks lets you see where your ballot is, from if it's in the mail to you from our office. If you've sent it back, you can see whether our staff has received it. You can see if it has been counted yet. So that's a really great service to be able to track your own ballot. And almost 5,000 of those individuals signed up in the last 6 months. So that is somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe a quarter of our mail voters are now doing that service. And of course, we continue to do triple verification reviews on all of those ballots to make sure that they're meeting all the code requirements.
So Eric, I know there were several parts of Virginia last fall where registrars and voters were concerned about mail delays, deliveries and things, and the timeliness. Have you heard any complaints or any concerns about, the mail delivery process in Prince William or Northern Virginia?
We always get some. I know that some of the Virginia problem was sort of the new DeJoy, is that his name? I don't know if he's the commissioner of the post office or what the exact title is, but he's the head of the post office. I know they were implementing some new systems. And I know that sometimes when you implement systems, there are unintended consequences of that it takes a little time to sort of work out the kinks. And I think that some issues that we had, it was 2023, correct, where we had a lot of delays in the mail, were a result of that. And I know that the Virginia mail and some of the centers in Virginia were particularly hard hit by that. It was much better in 2024. So I would not cite that as a particular problem. I think anytime you're talking about tens of thousands of ballots in the mail from our county, there's always going to be a few people who, their mailman makes a mistake, or, just problems that happen. We do resend ballots to people and things like that in those situations. But systemically, I think it was a huge improvement in 2024 from 2023. Would you agree with that, Natalia?
Yeah.
Okay. So that was much better. Okay, so some turnout numbers and trends here. So nationally, turnout, even though the U.S. population grew by about 3% from 2020 to 2024, the overall turnout was down a little bit for this election. So usually presidential elections, even if the percentage turnout is down a little bit, you still see the raw number usually goes up just because of population growth. And it's worth noting that it actually went down a little bit this election. And if you look at Prince William County, that was no different from 2020 to 2024. It went from 74% to 68%. And you can see there's a certain range here, somewhere between 65 and 75% is where most presidential elections turn out. I think it is worth noting that the elections, more recent ones, have mail and early voting. They have more voting options, not necessarily a higher average of turnout in those elections. So I think that's a common thing that you see at the legislative level is concerns that mail voting and early voting are ways to get more voters to participate, but voters really more decide whether they're going to participate, and then those options are really what they decide is kind of convenient or better for them generally. That's not always true, but I think that is one misnomer about some of those voting options. So these percentages are they track similarly to statewide data as well. We did see a statewide drop from 2020 to 2024, which was reflected in the national data and in Prince William County as well. So the breakdown of voters, early voting and election day, pretty even. Almost 100,000 voters in each, about 30,000 male voters, and 7,000 mail voters. The biggest differences would probably be from 2020 to 2024, that we saw mail voting dropped off significantly. That wasn't really a surprise. A lot of people, for health and safety reasons in 2020, were voting by mail, that didn't want to do that this go around, and more of them went back to voting on election day. So we certainly saw mail voting drop. Early voting was somewhat similar. Election day was up some, and provisional voting was certainly up a lot, with same-day registration now being a thing in Virginia. And those provisional voters, I should note, some of those are early voters and some of those are election day voters. That is all those grouped together there. So overall, about 55% of our voters, or a little more, are voting before election day. I think that's pretty consistent with kind of national trends when these things are implemented, that you see somewhere in the range of 50 to 60%, sometimes even a little more, of voters that are casting their franchise before you reach election day. In logistically, I will say, early voting barely had lines. I don't think election day had any lines at all. Election day feels much more like a gubernatorial election now, an election day for presidentials, just because so many people were out voting. This is our early voting day by day. So the yellow bars there are the weekend days. You can see several of those are among the most popular, especially in the early going. The first Sunday we opened up, that was one of our busiest days up until the last couple days. And obviously the last Saturday is always a huge day. I put a line on there because I think we figured out kind of what our max capacity is with our current sites. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 6,200 to 6,400 voters that we can have, with keeping within either no wait or like a 15 to 20 minute wait. That's how many voters we can process. And I just noted that because you can see each day we could have handled another 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 voters. So it's great to see so many people out voting early. I always encourage people to not wait till the last couple days, because that's obviously when it really jumps up. But we are all procrastinators to some degree, and it's tough to fight human nature on that. So we try to be prepared as best we can. Even on that last day, I think we had some sites that probably got up to maybe an hour. So it was a little bit longer wait, but it wasn't anything too terrible. We did do evening voting for the first time, and this is interesting. So this is the data this is all Wednesday voters for those last 3 Wednesdays when we had all locations open. And you can see kind of hour by hour where the most popular parts of the day was. Generally what we see is kind of a bell curve, I guess, towards the middle of the day, with our most popular hours being between 11 and 2 p.m. You have about 10% of the voters in all those hours, and somewhere in like the 6 to 9% for all the other hours mostly. But you do see that after that 5 o'clock, when people are getting off work, there's a real pop there in the 5 o'clock hour, which was actually the most popular hour for voters. So I think that evening voting was definitely successful. I think as the board considers, you all control the days and hours in terms of how late will be open, which days and how many days during early voting. I think this definitely shows that was successful, and that that would be something that would be of interest to the voters, because we had about 20% of our voters vote just in those 2 hours on those Wednesdays. And if you go back to the day by day, you can see the Wednesday right in the middle of each of those weeks. You can see the Wednesday is the most popular weekday in each of those weeks because of that, with the exception of the final Friday. By location, our DMV and Haymarket continue to be the 2 sites that most voters go to. They tend to be about the same number of voters each day, a little bit more, at one or the other. And the office is our 3rd most popular location, mostly because it's open the entire time. Brentsville and Dumfries and Ferlazzo are less busy. I do have to say Ferlazzo had a lot of voters, though. I think voters have come to like that location more, and I think that the DMV, given the small size of the DMV, that was really helpful to having the DMV not be, the DMV was busy as it was. If all those Ferlazzo voters, maybe not all of them, but most of them you think would have probably voted at the DMV if they were voting early. Had they not been going to Ferlazzo, you really would have put a lot of pressure on the DMV. And We worked this election real hard. John and the team did a really great job of reimagining the space to add more check-ins, to have 4 check-ins instead of 2. And I think we've kind of maximized the amount of, the number of voters we can get through per hour there is really not going to increase more than what we did. I'd also note that we had 4,000 voters dropped off their mail ballots at early voting locations. So dropping off the ballot as opposed to using the mail was definitely a popular choice for a significant number of mail voters. This is probably a little hard to see. You can look at it online if you want to look at it a little closer. I mentioned this before. These are the 10 largest jurisdictions and how many early voting sites they have and when they open and whether they're using weekend voting. And I will say that Prince William does a pretty good job of sort of maximally enfranchising their voters. We have more site days than everybody but Fairfax, which is more than double our size. We have weekend voting, we have Sunday voting, we have more weekend days than most. I will note for this though, I think you give people that opportunity for convenience, but I think you can see there were news articles during the election that talked about early voting was down after the supervisors had changed the early voting ordinance. And I called a couple of those reporters pretty disappointed and pretty upset because I didn't feel like they knew what they were talking about, because mail voting, they were using VPAP numbers, which includes mail voting and in-person early voting as early voting. So the biggest difference between 2020 and 2024 is a huge drop off in mail voting, obviously. So there's that to start. But I also think it's you can't say you add more site days and that you get more turnout because of that. And I think this is a good demonstration of that. These are the 3 counties that are closest to us in size. Loudoun, Prince William, and Virginia Beach are all jurisdictions in Virginia that have just shy of 500,000 people living in them. And you can see that we had more site days, double the number of site days of both Loudoun and Virginia Beach. And we had more turnout than Virginia Beach, and we had less turnout than Loudoun, which had really limited early voting compared to some previous elections. But Loudoun voted at a higher rate than Prince William did. So having more sites open provides more convenience for voters. But I don't think you can say it drives turnout. We talked about that earlier. I think this is a really good statistical comparison of that. So if you'd like to look at this chart, we'll post these materials online. You can look at that a little more closely. There's a lot of data in there. So overall turnout, Prince William County, a little bit lower than Virginia. We noted earlier that the counties that leaned heavily red had higher turnouts than those that leaned heavily blue. You know, Prince William County is not a heavy blue, but it's a lean blue. So the turnout being slightly below Virginia's totals, not really all that surprising given that. So a couple early voting notes in the future here. Voter education continues to be a challenge. I do think us continuing to, I do want to talk to the board at some point, the supervisors, about funding a voter guide each year. I do think that helps, getting that voter guide to all the households and giving people their options. Even with that, I'm always kind of surprised and amazed how many people are just showing up to sites on days they're not open or at hours they're not open. As someone who, you know, when I go to the grocery store, I check Google to see if it's still open at 8:30 o'clock at night, and that information is available. So we want to continue to provide voter education opportunities to get people to use our website. You see all these moments where people come in and you feel bad that they're confused. And I had a great moment. The husband of my real estate agent, we were at some event she was having, and he said, you know, I went on your website and I found where all the sites were, and I went to see if the wait time was long at the location, and I thought, oh, that's exactly what we would love for everybody to do, because all the information is there. But we have to give voters time to build habits with all these sites. We've had an ordinance that kind of moved the sites around each election, so hopefully with some of these sites with Ferlazzo and Brentsville being open every election, that people will start using those every election and they'll build habits, and that really takes consistency. So it'll be interesting to see what that means. So in terms of future considerations, and if the supervisors want to do anything differently with this year, next year, would you as a board want to add extended hours to more weekdays? Do the supervisors want to open the DMV for the entire early voting period? That was one thing we heard, was that it'd be nice if there was, people perceived our office to be more in the western part of the county. and they thought there should be an opportunity during the entire early voting period in the eastern part of the county. I would note on that that is a statutory thing, that our office has to be open for the entirety of the early voting period, and satellite sites beyond that are at the discretion of local ordinances. And very few counties in the state keep many sites open for the entirety of the early voting period. Probably tell you how many that is. It's, let's see, it looks like there's 4 counties that have sites that are open for the entirety of the voting period. And most counties don't have satellites at all. Only about 15% of counties and cities in Virginia have satellite locations beyond the base office. So would an additional site in the mid-county be beneficial? You know, I know that there's not really anything kind of in the middle section of the county. Would something there be beneficial? So those are things for the board and the supervisors to kind of consider. And if you all would like any additional, you know, data or anything like that we can provide for you all to take a look at that as you're making decisions about the hours and as you're making recommendations or maybe having conversations with supervisors about those future considerations, that'll be something that we can, you know, look at down the road, and we're happy to provide that for the board. Any questions about the turnout numbers or anything like that?
No, so one thing obviously different about last year, we had a presidential primary, a congressional primary, and then the general election. So we have elections every year, but last year we had 3. So during, you know, with early voting going on, we were voting for a lot of days. Normally, we're back now to a primary in June and one in November. So that will take a little bit of strain off the officers and the staff and everything else. But yeah.
Yeah, I know there was a legislative proposal too to move the presidential election and the 2 primaries in the presidential year into one, but I don't know if that's actually going to pass.
Yeah, there's also, so apparently the Senate Majority Leader Scott Surville is raising the possibility of having the General Assembly look at moving state elections to the even years with the federal elections.
Oh.
You know, this goes way back in Virginia history. We're one of only a handful of states that have our elections in the off year, the odd years. And it obviously puts a lot of wear and tear on everything that we do, but in terms of turnout numbers also, some voters feel like they're being barraged with political ads and stuff, and they don't get a break in Virginia. We go from one cycle to the other, and there's always another election. So that, I assume that would probably take a constitutional amendment, so that would be, sometime down the road, but at least there are people in Richmond thinking about, well, should we stay in this kind of off-year system for state and local races?
It's interesting talking to different registrars about that, coming from states that had them every other year. I think it's a little easier on us. It kind of gives us time to retool and reassess. But I think there is also a point, some of the registrars say, we love having elections every year. It keeps us on pace. It keeps us, there's kind of no letting off the gas. But we're in better practice, I guess I should say. As you come to each election, you're not having to relearn things. Our officers certainly are they're training every 6 months. So they're remembering the things that they have to do. So there are, pluses and minuses to both. Okay, so the voter registration report then. We had our NVRA cancellations completed in January. So this is just like less than a week ago, almost exactly a week ago. What this does is it cancels all the inactive voters that have been on the voter rolls around the state after 2 federal elections. So voters receive a confirmation mailing where they can affirm their address, and if they don't, then they're moved to inactive, and then it's after each federal election, there's a point where they clean the rolls to cancel all those individuals, the largest of which is always after the presidential election, because it's been since that last presidential election, there's now been 2 federal elections, and people have maybe moved but just not been active voters during that period, because there's a number of voters. I know I talk to people, sometimes they say, I vote every election, and what they mean is
every 4 years in November they vote, which is a little different than every election in Virginia. So Elect executed that process the last week of January, and that was 13,171 cancellations. So that was based on work from last year, so setting that up last year. So total cancellations from last year, including that NVRA that just went through, are listed here. That is from either that NVRA cancellation, voters that have moved out of state or been deceased, those that are removed for felony reasons, those that are removed for non-citizens, and those that are removed for voluntarily, just asking, I don't want to be a registered voter anymore. That is the list there. Total new registrations and updates, so new registrations, more than 22,000 of those in Prince William County last year. Re-registrations, so people with an existing registration that were just updating their registration. Transfers in, so people coming into Prince William County from other places in the state is about 11,000. People with name and address changes, so someone got married, they changed apartments in the building that they were in. They moved from Lake Ridge over to Haymarket. Things that were happening within the county, that accounts for about 26,000 changes and pre-registrations. So a lot of different updates for the registration team to do. This leads to a lot of communications with voters. We sent out about 47,000 voter notices. Those provisional status letters, there were almost 8,000 of those. We also send out letters for address confirmation. What I just mentioned leads to those NVRA cancellations. Denial letters, people that register but they don't complete an essential component or required component on the form. They forget to check the citizenship box. They don't sign the form, just a number of different things that are required. Pre-registration, so those would be your 16 and 17-year-olds who are registering to vote. And then citizenship affirmations. Those are all communications that we sent out. So this is a total transactional workload of about 147,875 transactions over the course of the year. So a lot of work that voter registration team is doing. It seems like a lot, but when you think about think about the fact that we have 300,000 voters or so, think about how often in a 10-year cycle you might move or you might change your name. There's a lot of little things that happen in people's lives. They get a job in their state. They get a job here. So that team is constantly updating that database. So here's what our current total registered voters is. Our active voters have obviously gone up after a presidential election where we had a lot of voters register. We had a lot of same-day registrations. That has increased. Our inactive voters have dropped off significantly. That's been cut in about half after that NVRA process is completed. So that puts us at about 325,000 voters total in Prince William County for the moment.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can you go back to the voter cancellations?
Yes.
There were 338 non-citizen cancellations. If you go down to the re-registrations, the citizenship affirmations, 338. And so, am I reading that correctly, that there were 338 alleged non-citizens, all 338 were contacted, and all 338 reaffirmed?
I don't
Or is that
think
number
so.
a coincidence?
I think it's a coincidence, but we can get you more detail on that. It is a good observation, though. No, the non-citizens were the ones that were moved by the state. So those are ones that don't have anything to do with our office. It's just it comes into our system and we confirm that change. That is based on if you'd like to read more about that, there was a lot of discussion about that just before the election. A lot of issues between some of the actions that Governor Youngkin took and some of the court cases and things that came out after that. So, but I'll get you more details on that, Marcus, about the citizen affirmations.
Thank you.
I would say that, I don't know, Natalia, what's your impression off the 338? I think we usually have maybe 5 or 10% of those that actually respond and re-register. Well, no, actually, I think it might be more like a quarter. It's in a previous report from another election, so I'll have to look that up. It's certainly a minority, but it's certainly a number of individuals. Because we know from our research, those are individuals that are identified as non-citizen largely because they just didn't check off the citizenship box. is not a, what would be the right way to say it? It's not a dispositive finding of the status of their citizenship. It is based on them filling out the DMV form, a form that we know has some flaws. So we do know from talking to some of our voters that a number of those are citizens. Some of them were individuals who were just surprised and said, you know, I've been living in Prince William County for 14 years. I was born in this country. I don't know why I'm, you know, being labeled in this. So I know we've discussed that that's a issue that I think everyone involved could do better on that one. We could do more to make sure that non-citizens are certainly not on our voter rolls, and we could do more to make sure that citizens who are citizens remain on the voter rolls. But that is a state prerogative of the State Department of Elections and the state leadership more so than us. I'd certainly like to see more transparency in that process for us, because we don't have any information other than we get a list that says this person's not a citizen, and we have to go, okay, we have to remove them, and there's not anything more. We don't have documentation. We don't know. We do know from our research that we found that we don't think that most of those non-citizens are actually non-citizens, but like I said, we can't prove it dispositively one way or the other. So it's a challenge, and I think it's certainly an area for improvement. Thankfully, it is overall a small number of citizens. I think when that legal battle was taking place last year, it was only about 6,000 registrations out of, I don't know what the number of voters Virginia has, 6 million? Is that close? Okay, off the top of my head.
And in each of those instances, if someone's name appears on that list, they're canceled because that's what we're told to do.
Yeah.
But then they're contacted and given an opportunity to contest that.
Yeah.
And prove their citizenship and be reinstated. Correct? Yes,
they legally can respond. They get a communication, and then, well, I guess that's, you know what? So maybe it is correlative then, and the citizen okay, I'm sorry. So citizen affirmations, it would correlate, because this isn't communications is not changes to the voter registration database. The communications is the letter that was sent to that individual where they then can confirm. Mm-hmm. So if this is not a database action here, this is a voter notice of some type that they were sent. Now, how many of those we get back is a pretty small number. What's the time frame they have to respond to? Is it
They
7?
only have 2 weeks, yes.
So they get
they usually don't respond on time,
So,
unfortunately.
so yeah, we get a very small number that actually respond in the time frame of that. Now, that said, they still can go and register, or they could complete a same-day registration. So some of the kerfuffle about that last year, I thought, you know, well, I understand the concern about the legal rights, but those individuals, even if they were canceled incorrectly, did have an opportunity to still go same-day register if they're a citizen and if they're going to attest to the fact that they're a citizen. So my apologies to that, Marcus. There is a correlation, but it's not a database change. It's not a voter registration status change. It is a communication that went after
so
that.
So then an amended question then.
Yeah.
Do we know how many of those 338 responded and confirmed?
Oh, to the 14-day notice? I could get you that number, okay. But when I know offhand it's small.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Sorry to derail you.
Oh, no, it's fine. Those good questions. We'll get you that number.
Thank you.
I think in the previous research on it, we did look at how many of them within a certain time frame had re-registered as well. So we'll look at both those numbers. How many respond to that initial mailing, and then how many re-register within a certain, period of time, which I think that number is closer to half if you take that out like a year or so. Right. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, that's it for me.
Okay, new business, appointment of election officers.
All right, so you all have, by code, in the first week of February, you all have to appoint officers per the PWC board's policy. We appoint them 2-year terms. The code allows those to be either 1, 2, or 3-year terms, and the board decided they wanted to do 2-year terms. You all can amend that if you would like to. You have 2 lists there. There's a new officer list of 88 officers. that's a single page one. You guys have a single page and a huge packet there. So the new officers, the 88 officers, we do have objections noted on those from the parties. That one was reviewed. The reappointment of the officers, that one is about 3,000 officers. These are officers that were previously reviewed and appointed. This is for their new 2-year term for 2025 and 2026. We had some challenges with the objection process for this one. I did not hear from the Democrats at all. We got objections from some from the Republicans, but they all weren't reviewed in time. There was a request for an extension there. The code is specific about when that nomination process has to happen, and it's 10 days before the meeting. So I noted to the party, I did have a conversation with the Jacob Alderman, the Republican chair, and said that, there's not really much, I don't have the power to change the code, so we have to follow what's there. But that what they could do is then, I suggested they review that further and then communicate with you all, and you all could adjust those, because right now you're appointing these officers in general to serve, but also based on their party designation. I think you all could certainly, in your March meeting, if you have time to clarify some of those objections and work with your party chairs on that, could clarify and change some of those appointments. You all have done that in the past, which is basically saying this person's still an officer, but we are modifying them from a Republican representative to a nonpartisan representative, or from a nonpartisan representative to a Democratic representative, or whatever the party chairs would like on that. So given the confusion around that, and I will say our office did provide this in timely manner. We sent this back in mid-December to the parties and provided it timely. I think it's probably difficult for the parties in terms of the timeline for this because it happens during the holidays, right after a major election. I think much like our office, that's a time of year that the parties are getting a breather after they've had a long year of elections as well. So, so there are, so I would suggest you all appoint the lists as we sent, and then that we work with the parties to check on, to review those objections, and that you all can then make modifications to those appointments at your next board meeting.
Sure.
So the parties have reviewed the short list, the new people,
Yes,
but not the larger list.
they have, but it was not timely. I think some of them we got beforehand, some of them we got after. Yeah. And it's a code thing, so it's real, it's a ticky-tacky thing, right? We can't accept them because through the code they're late, but there's nothing in the code that says you guys can't modify those appointments at your next board meeting. So that would be my suggestion to ensure compliance with the code and to make sure that we are getting the feedback and input from the parties as we have been doing for the past couple years.
So at the very end of the larger list, there are a couple of names: requested party change from R to no party, party change from D to no party. Are those requests that the voters or the officers made, or that the parties?
The officers made.
Okay. And then, so so if we approve, all of these, and then have opportunity for the parties to, come back in March, where does this put us in terms of a partisan breakdown of officers?
I'm not sure that exact number. It's 3,000 officers total. I think, I don't know.
Wouldn't that be an important note? I mean, if they're supposed to, we're trying to achieve parity.
Yeah.
So it's important to know
Yeah.
how many. Numbers are important.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a challenge. You pulling it up? Okay. John's gonna pull that up.
Thank you.
I mean, so there's, the tricky component of this is we can't, obviously people, when the officers apply, they tell us what party they would prefer to represent. We then send those lists on to the party for review, for them to sort of confirm them. It's a way for us to make it easy for the officers to apply. It's a way for us to make it efficient and easy for the chairs and the parties to review the information. You know, I know that leading up to a few years ago, the parties really hadn't participated this in a long time. And so there were a lot of challenges where every county was doing things a little differently. And what most counties were doing was, you know, officers, let's say it's 2019, officers would just be like, well, I don't mind representing the Republicans. Somebody's like, I don't mind representing the Democrats. And there you go, you're code compliant. And it wasn't, I don't think it was anything that the offices were doing wrong. They were reacting to a complete lack of input from either party on this. There became a lot more interest in this after the 2020 election, and our board adopted a policy in 2022 to spell out a number of, like, a process for that worked for the board, because obviously it's essential for you all to appoint enough officers that we could staff the election. And it's also important that the parity be reached, that the parties have an opportunity to review and nominate their individuals. So, so that's where we're at. Our challenge in Prince William County is typically we just don't have enough Republican officers. Now I've spent over $10,000 in the last couple of years to do targeted recruitment of Republicans for several years now. And we have gotten to a point where we have enough officers in this past election to have parity, after a point where in 2020, I think it was 2-to-1 Democrats to Republicans. And important to note that probably isn't even a real 2-to-1, because that was a self-selecting process. They weren't approved. So where we're at now is we're recruiting as many officers as we can, but we're having a hard time getting enough Republicans. We have enough to make the elections work. Oh, okay. I got handed a note with the numbers. So the current list has 1,210 Democrats, 726 Republicans, and 1,159 nonpartisans. And that is, in a typical election, a typical general election, for the presidential, we had almost 1,100. But a typical general election would probably have somewhere around 700, 800 officers, 7 to 8 officers at each site. So that's more than enough for most elections. But we do want to make sure to continue to recruit people and have enough people so that we need a buffer. You know, if you need 400 people from each party each election, then you need to have twice as many. So we're close to that now, but we still need to continue to get more Republicans, and we've done, you know, a lot to recruit them. And any ideas the board has to, we're squeezing that stone so tight, I'm not sure what else we can do. We have had the board send recruitment letters. We've sent targeted. We've used primary data to send letters. So I think we are in a much better place now than when I started. When I started, I was told the number of officers we had, not Republican, Democrat, but just overall, and thought, uh-oh, we need a lot more officers than this. So we've recruited a ton, and we're in a good position now. But I think we still need to do some work on the Republican officers, and we're still trying to continue to recruit Spanish-speaking officers too. We had more than 40 precincts. Dina, is that correct? I think last election that had Spanish-speaking officers. That's really great. We're not required to have that. We do have tools that officers can use to communicate, but I think it's nice to have an expanded program there. So those are the two areas that we've really focused on.
I'm sorry, Eric, you said how many election officers do you need to run an election?
In a general, probably like 750 to 800.
Okay.
For a primary, it's a lot less. For a primary, you might only need about 450, 500 officers. It varies a little bit, you know, depending on, we try to make projections before an election, look at what turnout's gonna be for that particular year. But yeah, you're probably talking about 800 for a typical general, with 1,100 being your presidential year, and a primary in the range of more 450, 500, somewhere around there. So,
I have a couple of comments on that, but are we taking questions at the moment? We have a gentleman here who's been patiently waiting.
Oh, all right, yes.
Thank you. My name is Alan Steele, I'm an election official, and a couple of comments. First of all, this seems to be the first time that the election board has seen this list. It's a massive list. Secondly, I do declare for a party, but I'm not a member of either party, so therefore have no input, as obviously 1,100 others don't have any input into this list. And thirdly, my public comments are going to be directly applicable to a few specific names on that list. So I would encourage the board maybe to take this under advisement. It's a very important decision. It's not been vetted publicly, it's certainly been vetted with the parties. And it would seem it's pretty important in maintaining credibility, which I think is excellent, by the way. I'm not criticizing anything about the credibility of the organization. So that's just my suggestion. Thank you.
My comments on this, and this is really me thinking out loud, making sure I understand this, and hopefully it'll be edifying for those listening as well. But what we're talking about here is the total pool of potential officers that could serve if nominated by one of the parties and selected for position at one of the 103 precincts that we staff.
yeah.
And so this, we don't have to have an exact number of Republicans and Democrats in the database as the potential pool of officers. Parity is then achieved in assignment,
Yes.
assuming that we have an appropriate and sufficient number from both parties. What I have noted, though, as I've been sifting through our database, is that we, as the registrar said, we have achieved almost exact parity in terms of having an equal number of Republicans and Democrats assigned to chief and assistant chief positions across our 103 precincts. And that, and I'll ask for clarification on this if my understanding of this is correct. Parity under the law requires that if a Republican is the chief, a Democrat has to be the assistant chief, and vice versa. That's the extent of parity, is just making sure that the top two positions in each precinct are represented by different parties.
Well, also that the number of officers, so if you have, let's say, for example, if you have 9 officers in a precinct, the party representatives are the nonpartisans are not supposed to represent more than a third of the officers, and the party officers of representation should either be equal or within one of each other. Okay. I think they give a little leeway because, you know, if Dina has, you know, the night before the election, one officer calls up and it throws it off by, the balance off by one, I mean, you don't just say, well, we're shutting down that precinct, nobody gets a vote there because we don't have officer parity. We have, so you have to be within one overall. So ideally, if you've got, you know, 10 people at a precinct, you'd have 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats and 2 nonpartisans, and one of the Republicans and one of the Democrats would be your chief and assistant chief.
Okay, so the concept of parity extends beyond the chief and assistant chief, applies to the whole team.
Correct, yes.
So I haven't gone that deep into my preliminary analysis of all of this, but what I did note for the chief and assistant chief positions, we do have an equal number in terms of if the chief is one party, the assistant is from the other. However, in 2/3 of our 103 precincts, one party dominates the chief position. And so while we have one of each, it leans heavily to one side who has the senior position at most of our precincts. And then additionally, not necessarily part of this discussion, but something I've talked to the registrar about and we'll talk about in the future, is that it's usually the same person each year at a precinct, which I would argue is probably not good for the long-term health of the system. We need to cross-train our election officers, and people need to have an opportunity to step up and be in charge for a number of reasons. It's good for the health of the system. It's good for the feeling of the satisfaction of the service, feeling like you can actually climb the ladder and have a chance to be a chief, and that those positions aren't locked down by a cadre that has owned those positions for years. But I think that's a conversation for March, I think, is when when we were going to discuss that.
Yeah.
But, so more to follow on that. But back to this, what we're talking about here is just the potential pool of candidates that could be assigned to a precinct. And we don't have to have exact parity in this pool. But when we go to assign the officers, that is when parity matters.
Yeah, well, we can't control the parity in this pool. We can't
Exactly.
control who applies, and in a county that, in the recent presidential elections has leaned more Democratic, you're naturally going to have more Democratic applicants. And the leadership imbalance that you're talking about is a similar thing. If we've had, twice as many Democratic officers that have served for, let's say, 5 years or more, 3 years or more, naturally we're going to have more of those individuals that are going to have moved into leadership position or have been comfortable enough or been selected by the staff to move into those position. I would note overall, though, that I think that the parity component is obviously something that's important. It's something that, when I started here was definitely an objective and an important goal. And, credit to Dina McBride and John and Rick, who have all worked to make sure that that goal is met despite a lot of these challenges that we can't control, but that we have to, to overcome. I feel like I lost my point. I'm a little tired. I think overall, I don't oppose. The job of an officer and the duties of an officer don't really change whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, though. When you are completing a provisional ballot, there's a process you're supposed to adhere to. When you are assisting a voter to check in or you're checking their ID, there's a set list of IDs that you're supposed to check. So I think in terms of, I certainly understand the concerns that you're talking about, Marcus. I know you guys have talked about, I know we have talked about that some, and that will be an ongoing conversation, some things that we can modify to address those concerns. But I just wanted to point out that the jobs of the officers, regardless, is really the same. If you have a precinct that has 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats and 2 nonpartisans, and I'm a voter that goes through that precinct, ideally, I should have no idea what the party line of those 10 officers in when I get served, because the way they serve me should be focused on meeting the law and the customer service that I receive. So I certainly think that there's things that we can do. I know we've presented all those things that we've worked on. I think after this election, it was like, great, we've done all these things. I feel really good. What's next? What's the next thing that we're going to work on? So I'm looking forward to working with you all to figure out what those things are, put plans in place, and make those improvements to achieve some of these. We've achieved the big things, and now it's time to fine tune and get into some of those things that need improvement. So
How are the assignments made?
well, our staff goes through and they make the assignments. We do send the board out a notice. I believe it's 30 days before each election. Usually we do it sooner than that. So that the board can see how the numbers stack up, what the assignments are. If the board has input into that, they're welcome to let us know things that they think we should change. Traditionally, it's mostly been done by the staff, and I think that's partly because, if you guys are a board of a county with 4 precincts, then you might actually know most of the officers, and you might have a sense of who they are. And I certainly know, a number of our officers, the ones that work early voting, the ones that do a lot, some of our chiefs, but I don't, there's 3,000 people here. I don't know, all of these officers. So the staff is really responsible for maintaining our database, updating the applications as we get them, and I will say they do really an outstanding job of that. Not only all the work that goes into it, but all the additional, partisan requirements and things like that that have to be done, and balancing that with not only looking at the X's and O's, and I guess in this case the R's and the D's on the paper and making sure those are in balance, but also knowing those individuals and what their motivations are, that Gail would be happy to be the chief, but she'll only be the chief if she's got Reggie there to help her, so there's these are numbers that we have to meet for the code requirements, but they are also people, and those situations are complicated. I spent my first 7 years in elections working for DC and doing election officer training and staffing, and so there is a lot of nuance in how you manage situations. It's really hard to, even just working for 1 or 2 days together each year, there are challenges, and you have to think about those and work through with those individuals. So anyway, that's a little bit of what goes into it, but the staff does a lot of that work, and we do provide regular updates to the board with, the lists of where those assignments are and things like that. And then this is one area that the board, we're going to go into GREB duties in just a few minutes here. This is one area that's very strongly in like the board's column is the appointment and the oversight of the election officers. And I'm very thankful that, and I'm sure you guys will come to, well, I think Marcus, you've already seen some of the great work they do, but the really outstanding work that team puts in, and all the T's get crossed and all the I's get dotted, and they really are, do an excellent job, so.
Back to the question at hand. In order to stay in compliance with the code, does this have to be approved today?
We all need to appoint officers at the first, at the regular meeting the first week of February. So,
That's a yes.
technically, yes.
So in terms of, so the large reappointment list, these are all people who, can we presume they've already, so we're giving the parties another chance to vet this list, but can we, since these are all people that have been approved, and worked in previous elections, if they, even if they were added in September, these people have already been approved by the parties. We're just, in addition to doing the appointments as the years go on, but these are people that I would assume have already been vetted by the parties. But the code says we have to reappoint them, so we're giving them an additional bite at the apple, essentially.
Yeah, everybody on the smaller list you guys have, that one page of the new officers, the 88, those are totally new people. You have the objections noted on there. Those are new individuals that have, they applied basically right around or just after the election through, a couple weeks ago. The 3,000 were officers that have already been appointed by the board at some point in the last 2 years, whether that was 2 years ago when you all did this appointment process, or whether that was 6 months ago when we got an application from them and you all appointed them in the summer. So yeah, the list of 3,000 are officers that we know and work with already, that you all have appointed, that have been reviewed and vetted by the parties at some point. Now, they might want to, maybe they change what the vetting process is, or maybe they didn't object to somebody before, but they might now, so there's certainly room for that. But they have been appointed previously, so this is not their first rodeo.
All right. Do we have a motion?
I move that we approve the list of election officers, both the reappointments and the new, with revisiting party chair objections and party affiliation in the March meeting.
I second that.
Okay, any more discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Pass unanimously, so we will, again, send these out to to both parties, and with a, encouragement that if they, if they are going to, object, then they do that timely, so we can consider all those changes in March.
We'll resend those communications right away. I think we have something from the Republican Party at this point, but they might want to look for more extensively at it as well. And I haven't really heard anything from the Democratic chair or the party on that end. So, all right.
Okay, GREB duties.
All right, so elect recommends that the board annually review the responsibilities of the electoral board and the general registrar. You all have what I sent you last week, which was the model that previous board member Mark Dillon and myself built back in 2023, was adopted by the board at that time. It was reviewed again in the fall or summer, I can't remember, of 2024. But given that you all are a new board and mostly, and that this is sort of a, touchstone part of the process, that sort of the other dominoes kind of fall from there. I thought it makes sense to send it to you all, and it's certainly, you all don't, there's no code requirement here that you all adopt these today, but at this meeting or a meeting in the near future, it would be good for just clarity of what my job is and what your job is, and the code is very explicit on some matters that are clearly in your domain. The code is explicit on some matters that are in my domain, and then there are a number of things that are kind of in the middle that we either share or that, just as an example, the board has to approve a training plan before the general election. So it's my job, generally, as has been in the past, my job to prepare that training plan, and obviously in consultation with the staff that comes up with that, and then submit that to you all, and for you all to review that and approve that. So just as one example for sort of a shared responsibility. So I sent you all the list, which looked good to me. I did highlight, I think, 2 or 3 items that were either just me or just you all, and I thought really these are more shared things. So I did note those in there, but that was my really only input. I thought this was, we have a pretty good process for this, and the board has put in a lot of work over the last couple of years on this topic, which is good, because I don't think for the first year I was here there's really any mention or discussion on this, so I think it's been a helpful item. It's also just a good reference chart for the tasks that we do, and we included code references and things like that in there as well. So, and this is all, again, for the public. We post this online. We've sent this to some other jurisdictions have asked for this as well, because they're using it in some of the work that they're doing also. So it's been great.
Yeah, I will say that I am a huge fan of this. I know you shared it with me as soon as I came on board, and I've had time to go through it in pretty sufficient detail, and I'm sure Ms. Sturrock will as well. My background coming from the Marine Corps, as a pilot in the Marine Corps, every 2 years, every organization in the Marine Corps goes through what they call a Commanding General's Readiness Inspection, CGRI, in which case the Inspector General comes into your unit and gets down in every detail of your business, because there is a Marine Corps order or policy that tells you how to literally do everything from start to finish, everything that you do. And the Inspector General has taken all of those policies and directives and basically gone through it sentence by sentence and taken every task or requirement that you have and turned it into a question of whether or not you do it. And it looks much like this, that you are required to sit down with him every 2 years and explain how you comply with all of the things that the orders and directives say that you have to do. So it's a great way when you come into a new position to figure out what it is your job is, going through the CGRI checklist, and it's how you're evaluated on your performance, because the Marine Corps has a right to expect that you're going to do your job the way they told you to do it. And that applies here as well. As you know, the parties appoint or nominate the members of the electoral board, and we're appointed by the circuit court, and then we hire the registrar. So the parties have a right to know what they should expect from us based off of the Virginia Code, what the board members are supposed to be doing. And the board members have a right to know and expect what the registrar should be doing based on the code. And it's not fair or appropriate to hold either of those groups or people to anything other than that, because that is their job. And so for all of those reasons, I think this is great. It's published online, and I highly encourage the parties to use it, to monitor the activities of their nominated board members, to make sure that we are doing what they appointed us to do, And we will do the same for the registrar's office. And I have to say, for the short amount of time that I've been here, the registrar and his staff do an incredible job complying with the code. And I would also, as my last comment on this, I would encourage everybody as they come to these meetings with their public comments and their comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, whatever they may be, I would start with this. If what it is you're upset about or that you want to talk about, if you can't point to something in the code that we should be doing that we're not, or that we are doing that we shouldn't be doing, then I would say that we don't really have a common ground to start that conversation. You're more likely concerned about the existing law, which, as we said before, has to be addressed to the General Assembly. So that's my diatribe on this. I like it. I would recommend that we give Ms. Stirrup a chance to review it before we adopt it, though.
Agree.
I have one question. You have highlighted 808, mark receipt date of mail ballots. It's, right now, it's yellow, GR only. So is this?
I think that was, I think it might have been just GR before, or I'd have to look at the old ones online. I can look it up, and just for reference for the public too, like when we've adopted these in the past, they are posted online and publicly available. And this is like the Cliff's Notes versions of the GREB handbook, which is a document that's online that I know the board is all familiar with. But there is a public document online that has, I mean, it's massive. It's hundreds and hundreds of pages, but it outlines all of the duties and responsibilities of our office and all the little, teams within that and how they do their jobs. This is sort of the high-level version of that. I think that was marked as GR only because we get mail ballots every day, and I wouldn't expect you all to come to the office every day to timestamp mail ballots that we receive. If you all would like to start doing that, I think it could be within your rights, but I think our team does a good job with that. And I do have to say, our mail ballot team, when we receive ballots, somebody asked me, I think they were considering some possible future legislation about having the ballot processed within a certain amount of time. It was going to be like 3 days. And a legislator called me and just to ask, hey, if we pass this legislation saying you have to process it within 3 days, would that be okay with you? And I told them, I said, we do it by the next day at the latest. So that is 3 days is going to be no problem because we're already, exceeding that standard. So our team does an excellent job on that. And yeah, I think this is one of those things where it is very interesting talking to some smaller jurisdictions sometimes. I guess there's smaller jurisdictions where some of the EB members actually train classes, which if you only have 2 classes for the duration of your election would be something that would be possible. And even if not training classes, just being present there for the trainings. And of course, you all are always welcome. I know the Keith, attends in the training pretty much every election to see how we're doing and keep tabs on it. But obviously in a larger jurisdiction, training for us is 6 weeks of a class every day, sometimes multiple classes in a day. So, it's a little bit different. This list and how you classify things is going to be very different in a 5-precinct, 20,000 voter jurisdiction as it is to a, 300,000 voter, 100 precinct jurisdiction.
Okay, so we'll defer this until March? Okay,
Can you make a motion to that effect?
sure.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we table the General Registrar and Electoral Board duties for review and further discussion pending Ms. Stirrup's opportunity to take a closer look.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. So we will table this. All right, so we are now at public comment period. Did we have a sign-up list?
Yeah, it's out there. Just a second. Oh, Dina's going to grab it.
You've got this, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I think it's the same, it's just a smaller type.
Yeah, it just doesn't have the cover sheet.
Thank you.
16 pages, how many? Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have two people that have signed up for public comment. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes. Do you have a good stopwatch? Okay, great. So the first person we will hear from is it Alan Sales? Okay. Could you go over to the podium? Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. My name is Alan Saylor. I live in Woodbridge area. I have been election officer for at least 4 years, and I want to compliment the Office of the Board of Elections. It is unbelievable what is accomplished with a small staff. I've seen them operate. I've taken the training. Training is outstanding. I'm retired. I've done a lot of training myself. I just want to say outstanding job to all of you guys. With that in mind, I'd like to make a couple of comments that are intended to be constructive. The document you have before you is something that records observations after the early elections. I served both in the early elections for 4 days or 6 days at Courthouse, and I also did the day of voting, where I was an assistant chief, and I've been an assistant chief 3 times. My comments are specific to Courthouse. First of all, it's got lots of room. Please use it more. It has got the ability to handle more voters. Now, granted, we were an hour late in closing the last day of early voting, but I think it's got tremendous abilities. A couple of problems. We are across the parking lot from the police. Never saw a policeman ever. Did see him many times during the day of voting. So that's a minor issue. We didn't have any need for a policeman, but we did have a festival in the Ferrazzo building during one of those days, and the festival resulted in blocking the outside voting. And when I mentioned to the chief, there was nothing done, and I happened to be outside at that time. Fortunately, there wasn't a lot of problems. I was able to get people to move before the button or after the bell or something like that. But I was a little disappointed that the chief didn't make some effort to do something about it. Now, with that in mind, my specific comments are related to a particular election officer, and I've got no axes to grind. I'm not perfect. But these were so egregious that I think it moved into whether there was impartial and whether there's integrity in an election official and the chief. And the chief was complacent, I think, not because he did anything wrong, but because what he didn't do. We actually had a suited-up election officer that went out to one of the parties because their main candidate for the Senate happened to be there. That's exciting. She stayed there for 10 minutes, fully uniformed. And I don't think that was appropriate. And I mentioned that to the chief because I had no authority. I was just an election officer. And he said, "Oh, I've encouraged others to go out and talk to that person." I don't think that is the right response. Secondly, this same election officer, I had the pleasure of sharing the poll book with. There were 2 poll books at that station. She spoke out so loudly that there were many times I had to repeat where I was talking to the voter in front of me, giving them instructions on the balloting process. One particular, and you'll see this on the last 2 pages, so you can look at these in detail. There's one time I had a mother who was deaf and a daughter come in, and this lady that was on the other polling station doing her own work kept yelling for me to give her the form that would allow her daughter to assist, right? That's what is allowed. The mother said, "I don't want assistance. I simply want my daughter to tell me what you're saying so I can vote myself." This lady kept yelling from her polling book across to me, and I looked up, and there was the chief in front of me, and clearly the other voters heard this, and he did absolutely nothing. Except when it was all over, I got the mother into the voting polls. He said, "Alan, you need to hurry up. it's a little hard when the other polling book lady is yelling. And so there's more details there.
Could you wrap up, sir?
Yes. So in summary, I would request, and this is submitted to Eric, and I was a bit disappointed because essentially what he labeled me as a troublemaker because I complained about Prince William County taxes in the past, among other things. This is the first time I've ever submitted anything in writing. I'm requesting the board review this and provide a formal response. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The next comment person is Jeff Fuller.
Hello, board.
Good morning.
Eric and leaders. First thing I want to say is I was really impressed with the results of your staff survey that you briefed us on the last, whenever it was. It shows that you've got good leadership and good management, and clearly, I think it was probably the best in the county, as I recall. So that's really saying something. I also really appreciate the work that you've done on election officer recruiting and management and all of that. That we have a challenge. We all know we have a challenge, and I appreciate any other more good ideas on how we can get more Republicans to stand up. Keith and Eric will know what I'm talking about when I mention batch comparison risk limiting audit. I thought we had that settled for an election last year, and it fell through. So I would ask you to reconsider doing a batch. I don't know if it can be done this year because it has to be within the jurisdiction of the county. But I'd ask you to look at that. It's a way that you can actually know for certain that the machines did what the voter intended. And that's important to do once in a while. I don't think you have to do it all the time, but I would like you to take that under consideration. I would be grateful if you could come up with a way of providing visibility of the parties on the process of reviewing and curing the ballots. I say no more about it. There's got to be a way. Let me just ask, was the 338 voters in Prince William County that were non-citizen, or was that statewide?
Prince William County. Prince William.
Prince William, okay.
Yeah.
So, my question is, how many of them had voting records? In other words, non-citizens with voting records. That is a troubling concept, and I'm sure probably about a half of them did, based on the previous 114 that we went through. So I think we ought to pay attention when there's a non-citizen supposedly voting that's removed. And I accept the fact that there's a number of screw-ups at DMV and so forth, but not a good thing. I would be grateful if you could come up with a way. Teresa Dillon had to leave, but we have citizens out there scrubbing the rolls to find voters who have moved out of the state and are registered to vote elsewhere. I think that's a good function for the electoral board and the staff, instead of volunteers doing that. And they've identified, I think, somewhere around 2,000 last I heard. We mentioned last couple meetings ago about the idea of having a little bit of training on the process of how to do a paper election in the event of a crisis. And I think, Eric, you said you would take that under advisement. Then just for Keith, I've got to say that I'm unhappy with the Democratic legislature that insisted on not allowing an audit of the presidential election last year. It was a little petty and unfortunate. And it's just the kind of thing that, like you pointed out about the two electoral board members that stepped outside the lane, I think that was stepping outside the lane, and very disappointing.
Could you wrap up, Jeff?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Do we have anyone else that wants to make public comment at this point? If not, we will close public comments. So the next order of business is a closed session.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Electoral Board go into closed session pursuant to Virginia State Code Section 2.2-3711, Alpha 1 and Alpha 7, for the purpose of discussing issues related to personnel matters and probable litigation.
I second that motion.
All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. All right, thank you all very much. See you next month.
Do you need John and I, or we just close up?
No, those are good.